Living Adventurously is brought to you in partnership with Komoot, the route planning and navigation app that helps you make the most of your outdoor adventures. Whether you're cycling, hiking, running, or bike packing, Komoot's easy-to-use technology will get you out the door and exploring more of the great outdoors. You can see where I've been exploring by checking out the highlights of my journey on Komoot. Just follow the link in the show notes. My name is Alastair Humphreys. I set out on a bicycle journey around Yorkshire to speak to interesting, ordinary people who, in very different ways, are making an effort to live adventurously. I wanted to talk about what they do, about the barriers they've faced along the way, and to seek their perspective on some of the big questions that all of us encounter in our lives. Welcome to Living Adventurously. I've written here, needs intro music. Okay, here we go. That'll do. About how placing restrictions can actually encourage your creativity, and the catalyst that serious illness proved to be in his life. We talked about ambition, defining success, and his little tip of doing 3 small things a day to make the Black Swan better, as well as talking about the delights of milk vending machines, cricket, and flapjacks. And no, to answer what you're thinking, I didn't manage to blag a meal at the Black Swan, but the coffee was very nice. Please, can I test the levels by asking you, how do I cook a fried egg?
Low temperature, I think.
Really?
Yes.
Tell me more.
Well, it depends how you like your fried eggs. Because some people like them really crispy, but I think they can get to. Well, you get that bit that's almost see-through where the protein's been absolutely frazzled. I think, your pan of oil or even butter if you're feeling that way out, and then a lower temperature and almost poach it in the fat so it's nice and soft. And then if you want a little bit more crispy, you can always turn the heat up at the end and crisp it.
Interesting.
Because so many times fried eggs are crispy on the outside and actually there's like floppy bits of raw white in the middle, which is never good, especially first thing in the morning.
What about basting?
Yeah, I'm a baster, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I tend to go really hot and then baste, but you've teaching me things here.
That could work as long as it's quick enough. I just don't like it when you get, when the white becomes so sort of something else, like it's so coagulated and
Okay.
yeah, denatured protein molecules. Not
Well,
nice.
that's what an egg is, isn't it?
It's not definitely denatured.
No, I mean a cooked egg.
Yes, but it doesn't have to be all absolutely denatured, does it?
No, true. Okay, well, now we've got the sound levels right, and I've learnt something. Tommy, thank you very much for meeting me today. Am I the smelliest person who's ever been in your lovely restaurant?
No, because we've got a brigade of chefs upstairs in a hot kitchen.
Okay, good point. What is your favourite vegetable?
Oh, God. What is my favourite vegetable? Probably peas, because when we grow peas and we pick them absolutely tiny, you bite them. We never cook them. We always serve them raw because they're so delicious. They're so sweet. And when you bite them, they pop. I just think it's a really special thing.
Oh, fresh, yeah, that fresh pea. Because we live in a world of frozen peas.
Yeah.
Actually getting peas from the greengrocer, or for you growing them, it's totally different beast, isn't it?
I mean, in fairness, frozen peas are a really good product that, like, obviously sustain people. But I think that's the thing. When you get something like, the reason why I think I said peas is because they can be so much more than what we think they are. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good first first answer. So I'm cycling around Yorkshire for a month. Back in my youth, I cycled around the world for 4 years, and my diet on there was mostly banana sandwiches. These days,
Really?
it's now 2019, so I've upgraded on this trip to banana wraps. If you had to go cycle for 2,000 miles around Yorkshire, what would you be eating? Bearing in mind you have to carry it.
Banana wraps is quite interesting. Do you wrap the wrap around the banana and it's still sort of banana shaped, and then just munch it?
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't know. Obviously, you guess you need something quite high carby, do you? I like oats. I do like flapjack and things like that. I think that would be a good high energy thing for me. And I think I drink a lot of milk as well.
Ooh.
I like milk, and I think it's an underdrunk thing.
Pint of milk on a hot day.
Pint of milk and some flapjack, I think, would get me round.
Okay, I will. I will do that as an homage to you. Right, I'm curious to know, why is your food good here?
I'm curious to know that as well. I think the food itself, we do quite normal sort of good techniques. I think with any sort of food, cuisine anywhere in the world, if you follow the basic principles and the science behind cooking, you can get it pretty right. But I think what makes ours particularly interesting is the sort of the ethos behind what we do, which is growing and foraging a lot of the produce, and I think that's where you get very unique flavors. Back on the milk thing,
right.
If you go in through, not too far from here, I've discovered this amazing little farmer who has a vending machine where they have raw milk. So totally unpasteurised, and it tastes unbelievable.
Oh, where is that?
So it's at Pick Hill.
Pick Hill.
And it's called Cow Corner. And
right.
you literally go up, you slot it's like £1 a litre, I think. So you put your pound in, and there's the cartons there. You literally get a pound's worth of milk, and you walk out and drink it. But when I was a little boy, we had one cow that my granddad used to milk every morning, and I thought milk tasted like sweet and creamy, and then I realised actually it doesn't most of the time, because you have the pasteurised milk from supermarkets, which we all drink. And I haven't had raw milk since I was about 6 years old, until about a month ago when I discovered this vending machine, because there's so many legislations in place that stop you from selling raw milk, so they have to be quite highly scrutinised. But the flavour is unbelievable. I think the nutrition of it's a lot better as well. So that's a definite visit, yeah.
Okay, that is my next destination
and that's going to power you around your trip.
Okay.
Milk and flapjack.
Okay, thank you. Nutritional sporting advice from Tommy Banks. Why do you bother trying to make this place so good? I mean, there's plenty of successful pubs that just do really nice pub grub. You put in a lot of effort and headaches and work here. Why do you try and make it really good?
Well, actually, initially it came from the location, because when we first started, we did just run a pub, and probably not even a very good one, actually. And that was 2006. In 2008, when the big sort of crash happened, suddenly people weren't coming out into the middle of nowhere to visit us. And what most pubs did in the bad economy was discount, 2-for-1 steak nights, all these sort of things, bargains. Well, that's all very well, but you're not going to travel out into the middle of nowhere for a bargain when you can get that probably from your local pub. So I think the only way for us to survive was to do something more premium, something that would make us into a destination that people would travel to get here, to actually try it. That was the only way we could survive, was to do something out of the ordinary. So it was born out of necessity, really.
That's really fascinating that you deal with hard times by making stuff more expensive. That's a really unusual approach, isn't it?
I think so, but I think there's only two ways of dealing with it, isn't there? You can either go the discount way or the other way. And with our location, I think the problem with the discount thing is, if there's no margin on it, you're never going to survive anyway, even if you are getting people through the door. But it does work, and certainly in bad economic times, the bottom of the market often does survive, but the middle of the market probably doesn't. But I think it was really forced by location. But of course, the thing is, if you've no idea. It's all very well saying I'm going to make something the best it can be with an idea of it becoming a destination, but how do you do that if you've no idea? And I think there's certainly a year or two where I was like, we need a thing. I don't know what it is, but we need a thing. And like, why would you travel a long distance somewhere because it's unique. And, you know, I was thinking of top restaurants, which have a real thing about them that people would travel a long way for. And that's when we started growing produce and foraging, because I was like, I don't have any culinary background at all, actually. I wasn't trained in Paris. I started cooking some amazing French food and everyone will come for it. The only sort of food memories we had were actually growing our own food and eating it as a kid. So we started doing that, and by putting these restrictions in place and trying to aim towards a more self-sufficient angle, that really upped the creativity, because you have to be creative to make things, and it all kind of came together. But certainly there was a year or two where we were just doing quite strange food and no one came.
Okay, that's really interesting. So there was a time when you weren't trying to make amazing food. You were was it just a fairly normal, nice-ish pub?
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
was that
fish and chips, steak pie,
okay.
normal stuff.
And was that your limit of your aspirations at the time? So, if, for example, if that had carried on trundling along happily enough, would you have just stayed doing that?
Yes, quite possibly. Yeah, I think so. But you don't. I mean, when we started this, I had no idea what a Michelin star was, or a tasting menu, or and it was all unknown. You know, grew up in Oldstead and hadn't left Oldstead, and we just wanted to make a nice pub, and you know, hopefully it was all right.
Yeah, I find the story of you starting here with no training really interesting, and I just wonder, what were your parents thinking when they bought this place and put you and your brother in charge? Because you were a pair of numpties.
Yes. Still are, really. Yeah.
What were they thinking?
I've no idea. I still question it now. We ran, so we got a really small farm, which would never make ends meet. So growing up, my dad did a lot of contract farming. So he worked really, really hard. And mum ran a bed and breakfast in the farmhouse. So all the way growing up, we were kind of involved in hospitality, because we always had people staying in the farmhouse. And I think naively they thought it was the next obvious step was to maybe get the village pub and try and run that, because they've been running a bed and breakfast. So I suppose that was sort of the in. But for me and James, when we started this, I was 17. I literally left school halfway A-levels, because it seems like way more fun running a pub than being here. And James had already left school. And I think obviously we weren't unintelligent. We weren't bad lads, but we weren't focused. But I think at age of 15, 16, especially as a lad, I think it's quite hard to be focused on academia, really. So yeah, no, it was a bit of a, but I don't think we certainly didn't make a success of it any time early. No.
Right.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons that I'm spending a month cycling around Yorkshire is that I grew up in Yorkshire, but so far I've been going for a week. I haven't actually one or two places. I basically haven't been anywhere that I've seen before in my life, and I'm really interested by this idea of what knowing home. So, what does home mean to you?
Well, so I'm the total opposite. I've never actually left home, and I know my area around me really, really well. I think when you spend a long time in an area, you begin to know the seasons very, very well. And when you're involved in sort of agriculture and cooking, I always kind of brag that I think if you put me in like a time capsule and then it's drop me in Oldstead, I could tell you to within a week what sort of time of year it was by the seasons. And I think you get a real, for me, home is an understanding. Whereas I go anywhere, just if I went over to Lake Street something, I wouldn't have the sort of same connection. But oh, that's weird. It's like, oh, that's flowering now, and that's then they're doing this, and oh, well, I don't think we'd be doing that, you know. And I think it's more of a connection, really. I feel it as opposed to the actual sort of buildings and the location. It's more just like the general feeling of being around and in the land, I think. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. It makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting because I grew up also in a tiny village, very similar size to this, but in the Yorkshire Dales. And yeah, I was just desperate to get out. And for years, I just thought that the interesting world began away from here. And so I spent years just going off all around the world for many years. And it's only recently that I've come home and started exploring home and taken more of an interest in it in the way that you're kind of saying. But and I think that so that the point of that is that I'm trying in my way to live adventurously. That's what I want to do, is live an adventurous life. And one of the other reasons I'm cycling around is to try and meet interesting people who are living adventurously, but in different kinds of ways. and what you're doing is definitely bold and adventurous in a different way. So I'm wondering, what would your take on living adventurously mean?
It's a good just to touch back on what you were saying there. I think when you grow up in like a rural area, you do think, I want to get out of here. And I did think that. And I think you end up being carved by like necessity, like I talked earlier about changing what we did through the necessity of the economy, but also through the situations you're put into. And I always wanted to be a cricket player, actually. I wanted to travel the world playing cricket.
Me too.
Awesome. But I got quite ill when I was sort of 19. My plan was to spend the winter in Australia playing club cricket there. And I think if I'd never got ill, I'd have done a totally different path. I had no interest in doing this whatsoever. I too wanted to travel the world and be adventurous and do things, but I couldn't. And I think that reevaluated my situation, and actually that's why suddenly you play with the tools you've got in front of you. And I think that's why I threw myself into this, to make a success of it, because of the situation I was in. But what was the actual question? Well, what would I think about being adventurous?
Well, I can't remember what the question was, because that's more interesting what you said. And but I think this is a really interesting thing, that a lot of people I talk to really want to live adventurously in their own ways, but they can't because of X, Y, and Z, and that's usually time or money. They're the two usual ones. But in your case, it was illness, wasn't it? And you were more or less in and out of hospital for about a year.
Yeah.
So what did that experience that year teach you?
It's a very humbling experience. I mean, I think the thing was, I had not that all diseases aren't nasty, but the disease I had was ulcerative colitis, which meant I actually, as a 19-year-old lad, had a colostomy bag for a year, which is not cool in any stretch of the imagination. Not cool for your street cred. I think it made me not an angry person, but kind of like frustrated with the cards I've been dealt, and I think very determined to be successful, which I would never have had that determination otherwise, because I was pretty chilled out, and I was I wasn't successful academically. I had no drive, really. The only thing that was interesting was playing sport and actually having a good time and a laugh, and I would never have had the drive to do something. But after that, I kind of felt, I've got no qualifications. I'm this horrible skinny teenager with a colostomy bag. Like, I need to really pull my finger out and make something of myself. And I think that it gave me a drive and determination I wouldn't have had. So I think in a lot of ways it was an awful time, but in many ways I have a lot to be thankful for it, because I had no idea what I definitely would not be in Oldstead. I like you, growing up in a rural, I would have gone off somewhere else and done something totally different if not for that. But you get dealt these cards, don't you? And you kind of roll with it, because something good usually does come out of it. So
are you now in a hurry in your life?
Yeah, I need to not be, but I've definitely been in a hurry. And I think that's something that I'm finding, that impatience has probably been a catalyst for success, but actually it's not a sustainable thing. It's interesting, when we were talking earlier, you said I'm trying not to hurry as much. And I think that's exactly right. And it's something that over maybe the next decade, I'm going to try and slow it down a little bit, because I think there can be a lot of success in taking your time over things as well.
Yeah. There's different ways to do things, aren't there?
Yeah.
Would you rather have the best restaurant in the world or play cricket for England?
Play cricket for England. Well, I think you always want what you haven't, the opposite to what you've got, don't you? But I mean, that was always the dream growing up, and I think I still love cricket more than anything, and I probably think about cricket more than anything else, because as a kid I was this obsessed stataholic. Used to watch teletext flash over, which is fairly dull, but I used to find it enthralling. So I think that's still my first love. How
was the World Cup final?
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely amazing. I think that was the best advert for cricket ever, because people know I'm obsessed with cricket, but most people don't like cricket, so they're always like, what's the point in it, and then that was the ultimate advert, and
with it being on telly, that is wonderful, isn't it?
I think that's brilliant, because growing up I watched cricket, and since it's not been on free-to-air telly, I think you miss out on a generation of children who could have seen it. And I think with it being on telly, the amazing thing was we had like 7 hours of high-tension drama that then was a draw, and then another draw of which England won on a technical rule which no one even knew about in the first place. That couldn't be any more cricket. That's why I love it.
Oh yeah, it was amazing, wasn't it? Yeah. Also, growing up in a rural village, one of my main memories of being a teenager when I started to find being in a village really boring was trying to sleep as late as I could just to kill a bit of time and waking up ready for the test match.
Yeah.
So get settled in front of 11 o'clock, but then you come down and the covers are on, and it's raining. And,
Oh no! What am I going to do? Watch some highlights. But the thing for me, the escapism was actually if I could play cricket for men's teams on a Saturday. You, as a teenager, you get, if you were good at cricket, like you could get a team to play for. You get picked up, taken for a game of cricket, taken to the pub, a few beers, and then come back. And so I was living the dream as a 14, 15-year-old. You said because it was decent at cricket, you'd say everyone wanted you to play for them, so you go around playing all the time. You get driven everywhere, and you go to the pub. It was a great social, and I think sport is there's a lot of values in sport which can transfer into business, but into just your general life. And I played so much team sport growing up, and I always seemed to be made the captain. And I think the management skills I developed at a very young age helped me a lot when I actually got into the kitchen and looking after two other people.
It's interesting, isn't it, how things you do at one time in your life prove very helpful for another time in your life. You can't predict at the time.
No, not at all. But I think that's why it's not just classroom activities that develop people, And I think sport's incredibly important. But any other sort of activity that is involving human interaction, I think that's the really important thing, because that's really how you get on, isn't it? Unless you're on your own rowing across the Atlantic, of course, and you only have to get on with yourself. That's probably what I struggle with most, actually, getting on with myself more than other people.
Right. I get a veg box at home, just from local veg, which I love for the
nice
seasonality of it and learning to cook new things. But beetroot, you get a lot of it. There's a season of a lot of beetroot. How can I make beetroot not be disgusting?
Well, our signature dish is the beetroot cooked in beef fat, which transforms it somewhat. I think if you cook anything long enough in beef fat, it starts tasting pretty good. But I know what you mean. It's so funny because that is our signature dish, but so many people come to restaurants and say, oh, no, I don't like beetroot, and they refuse to eat it. And you're like, oh, please. And I think it comes from like a school dinners sort of thing where you had that pickled beetroot that was so acidic. But I think cooking beef fat is a really good way of doing it. But actually pickling it, but doing it in a slightly sweeter pickle with some nicer vinegar than the malt vinegar that I've used is a really nice way to have it as well.
Okay, thank you. I was reading an interview you did once in which you said that you felt a bit weird that you'd reached this pinnacle. You've done it brilliantly. You've reached this sort of pinnacle without really feeling that you were, in your words, pioneering in any way or doing anything amazing. Classic imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Do you still feel like an imposter?
Less so, but I think I feel we took steps from that. I think that the thing with that was I won a Michelin star at 24, which was the youngest ever or something, which is fine. But at the time, I was very insecure in the way that we were cooking, and certainly the food that I cooked at the time was out of other people's cookbooks. So a top chef would bring out a really good cookbook. I'm like, that's a great recipe. I tweak it a little bit, and hey, the food was very good. Of course, it was but it wasn't. There was no originality, and where I sort of felt fraudulent was that people hailing me as some sort of genius when actually I think if a lot of people applied themselves they could probably recreate other people's food and make it quite good, and that was a real catalyst to try and do something more unique, because I was like, if I'm going to keep getting this praise, I really ought to deserve it in some way. So that was the way of being more creative, and really inspired the garden and the farm. But imposter syndrome, I think we all have that though, because but I think we all look at other people and their achievements and hold them in higher esteem than we'd ever hold our own achievements. And so I think we all feel a little bit like imposters and think, well, look at them, they're doing something amazing. They probably mirror image it back. But I think that's a good thing. But one thing I've always learned is that you always think things are going to feel better than they actually do. I mean, you might be the right person to ask about this, because I had these, I'd love to be able to do that or that. And then you achieve it and you're like, okay, well, we'll try and achieve this. And I never feel quite fulfilled, which I always feel very disappointed about. But then your goals are more extreme and like more precise, I suppose, like something like, rowing the Atlantic, traveling right the way around the world. Do you get the buzz that you were hoping for at the end, or do you hope for a buzz? I don't know. Or is it all a little underwhelming by the time you've done it. I don't know how you feel about it, because I struggle with that. I always find that I wanted to achieve something, I achieve it, and then it doesn't give me what I thought it might.
I feel exactly that. And when I get to the end of something that on the face of it seems like a big achievement, what I generally think is, oh, well, if I've achieved it, it wasn't that hard. I should have tried something harder. Or like, and big journeys. So something like cycling around the world, which I set off at 24. So you, the same age as you getting your Michelin star. I think the one good thing that age has for it is just reckless enthusiasm,
energy as well.
And just a sufficient ignorance to just get on with stuff. But yeah, so I set off cycling around the world, and I was very conscious that it would have been really foolish of me to be doing the whole journey purely in order to get to the finish line and the achievement. That would have been a stupid thing to spend 4 years doing that. So it was really trying to appreciate the things along the way, which is easier said than done. And yeah, getting to the end, I felt very flat and an anticlimax. Everything I ever do, journeys, writing books, finishing films, when I'm finished, I'm like, bleh, what's next? And I don't like that.
Do you feel an emptiness after like that thing that I was putting everything towards? You almost don't want to achieve it because you're always striving for something. And then when you achieve it, it's like, oh, I need something now to achieve. Otherwise, you're just flat and empty. I mean, we were just talking about the World Cup. How does it feel to win the World Cup? Like, how do you get up after that? Like, what do you do? Yeah, I think you know, people who are serial achievers are like sports people. Someone like Roger Federer. How does he have the drive to do that over and over? Because once he's won everything, like, what does he do? He needs to find some like aliens that play tennis against have like 4 arms or something. You know, it's a weird one. But it's interesting to hear you say that. I think if not that I could ever achieve the things that you would achieve, because I just don't think I think I'd just give up long before. But I think I would really struggle with afterwards what to do next.
So do you say getting the Michelin star? Say once you've achieved that, does that encourage you to want more and more and more, move on to the next level, or does it make you worry that you might lose what you've got? So does it put you wanting to achieve more, or does it make you think, oh, I've got this and I'm worried I'll lose that? Because you can only go once you've got Michelin stars, you can only really go downhill, can't you?
I suppose so.
It's a cheerful thing to tell you.
It is cheerful. I think a little bit more of a slightly different approach. I think I think less actual worry about it. I certainly don't worry about losing it. There's bigger things in life than that. I think actually, before I achieved it, you think that's the pinnacle. It's all you can achieve, and then once you achieve it, you think, I'm actually not bothered actually now. There's actually more important things. Like, I'm much more interested in creating something amazing that's going to put a smile on someone's face, or getting into like opening another restaurant, like changing the way we farm, making different products, like investigating other things, writing another book. Things like that are more inspiring to me than that. But I mean, like, at the same time, if what I want to do is make the restaurant better and better every single day, and if we do that, then perhaps more Michelin stars will come our way because we're making it better all the time. But I certainly would never be getting out of bed thinking, oh, we can get that second star. Like, it doesn't really enter my brain.
Okay, that's interesting. One of the things that I've really noticed slightly changing in my own life, actually, I'm just going to ask it for you first before I tell you about me, is in your life, do you measure your successes or do you measure your progress?
Progress, I think 100%. Because I think going back to that thing, like, successes never feel like they just become, once you've achieved it, it's just one of them things, isn't it? Whereas I used to have a thing which I can no longer achieve, but I used to have this thing that I used to try and do 3 things a day, every day, 7 days a week, that made the Black Swan better. As I talk about when I was like 24 and something, I felt like this imposter syndrome, exactly that. And I'm thinking, how can I've got to make, because people are traveling here now and like expecting this to be awesome, and maybe it is good, but maybe it could be better. And there was just a million things that could be better. And I tried to do 3 things a day every day. And I think that's when I had real high achievement, because I was just nailing it every day. But I just
what
now
sort of things? I think that's a fascinating idea.
It could be anything that I thought was better. It could be from sourcing a new piece of equipment that was going to make things better, or changing a dish that I believed was better, or implementing a new way of doing things, or changing the way we have staff doing different things. Anything that I thought was going to have a positive impact on the future of the restaurant. But it had to be 3 things that were progressive. It didn't have to be, oh, I've made a new way of making this sauce and that's amazing. It wasn't all food based. It was more sort of team based, business based, location based. Now, like, probably if I could do 3 things in a week, I'd be quite happy.
Yeah, well, I presume that's because in the early days, there's a lot to improve, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah. And I probably had a lot simpler situation. You know, I think in them days I probably only received an email once a week or something. So there was a lot of things that could be, whereas now it's, you know, life's all about administration more than anything.
So if you had 1 hour extra day just for yourself, 1 extra magic hour, what would you do each day?
I'd probably exercise because that's something that makes me feel really good, but I never get to do. I find it very stressful. Like if I try and take an hour out of the day to do, like if I went to the gym or go for a run or it was to find that I always find that very stressful because by the time you've done that hour and then you pick up, if someone's emailed you, someone's missed a call, you got to go see someone. And I always think, oh, I can't afford to spend an hour doing that. So if I had an hour extra day, I would exercise because I think it would make me more effective in everything else.
But not sufficiently effective to merit an hour as it is.
Well, it should do. It should do. That's something I know. You know, there's many things that you can say and you know you should do, but don't. And that's one thing that, because I know the endorphins it releases in your mind makes you more energetic, makes you, even if you're more tired, you're more energetic and makes you more creative, I think. But I tend to be overwhelmed by the schedule and just never get to it.
Yeah. So you're almost 30 or you are 30?
I'm 30.
You are 30.
Yeah.
Any signs of a midlife crisis?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Well, we were talking about this earlier, actually. I now fear drinking, whereas as a younger man, it was like the dream was going out and having beers with the lads. Like, it just gives me a hangover and I feel awful and I'm not very productive afterwards. And then I feel guilty about my lack of production and I just don't need it in my life anymore. So I think that's one thing, that a massive change. But it's not really a midlife crisis, is it?
Yeah, that's been grown up.
That's just been grown up.
Well, it's good you haven't got it yet.
No, probably not then.
Give it 10 more years.
Yeah.
You'll be riding a bike around Yorkshire.
Yeah. Something like, I'm too busy at the moment to think of something, but I'm sure I would do. What's your midlife crisis? You can't say you had that because you rode around the world at 24, so it's not really a midlife crisis riding around Yorkshire.
No, my midlife crisis really came with the change from being a adventurous, ambitious, hardworking, full-on, charging at life madly, want to be the best I can be, and then getting married and having kids and suddenly having to compromise in my life.
Right.
And suddenly selfish me, was not the only thing in the world. That was the challenge I faced.
Okay, yeah, I definitely chase a little bit such, like, things hurt more, don't they? Like, I still play cricket a bit, but I'm nowhere near as good. And I'm very frustrated. Like, I'm playing cricket tomorrow. And I said, Charlotte, she's just like, maybe you just need to play more regularly because you're getting so bad at it. And I definitely chase that. I'm like, I know I could be better if I played more. So maybe that's starting to get a little bit of a midlife crisis. Like, I haven't really cared that my ability was getting worse and worse, but suddenly I do. Like, I feel it falling away from me. So maybe that's the start of something.
Dear.
Maybe I'll just start playing cricket 3 days a week. That'd be nice. And I'd get the exercise thing covered as well.
Yeah, well, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? Going back to when you got started, how did you manage to get some work experience in Raymond Blanc's restaurant? Because he must get a million young idiots getting in touch with him.
Yeah, probably does. I mean, I was only there. I only did a few days.
Well, yeah, exactly. I know it's only a taster, but
I think actually it's something that in our industry is quite common. So usually you just email a restaurant and say, I'd love to come and do what you call a stage, which comes from the French word like stagiaire, meaning you're just there for a time, and it's just free work experience. We have someone every week for the next 6 weeks coming here, and they'll come and do a week. It's quite common, and also it's a great way of recruitment, because you think, if you have somebody in for an interview, how do you know if they're any good? How do they know if they want to work there? If you go and do a week somewhere, you're fairly certain about the place and you're fairly certain about them. So it's actually a fairly commonplace in our industry, which is a really nice thing, because a lot of industry, and a lot of people wouldn't share. I think traditionally chefs would never share their recipes, whereas now we just allow people to come in and out, and it's cool. Like, people come into your kitchen for a week, they see everything you do, they move on, but it's all just part of it. You know?
Okay, that's fun. That's really interesting. 'Cause one of my working life is very lonely. I travel around on my own doing stuff, and then I sit in a shed and I write books, and I love it.
Yeah.
But what I really love the idea of is mentors. And so, this sounds like a really good system of trying to help young people come up. Did you have any of that mentorship helping you, or not really?
Not in like necessarily really in a chefing way, but I think definitely my parents have, because I've never really left home. They've always kind of been there in that sense, I suppose. But I think the having people in and like young people, I think it's really important because actually you learn from them as well. There's always something when you sit down and talk to someone, you always learn something. So I think it's quite good to have that sort of free movement and not be protective over anything, your intellectual property really, because at the end of the day you're not going to like it anyway. In a year's time you're going to thought of something new. So there's just no need to be protective. I think it's just good to just be free with things.
I've found exactly the same in terms of so about 10 years or so ago I thought, right, I want to try and earn a living out of adventure stuff. In order to do that, people need to know about me because no one knows anything about me. So the way I started telling the world was by blogging, just writing. And what I found through blogging is the more I give away, the better things become. So I just tell everyone everything I know, just tell. And there are some other adventurers I know who are very protective, like, oh, don't tell anyone. But whereas I really think that the more you give away, the more you receive back.
Absolutely. The thing is, you can't bank on the things you know now being only the things you're ever going to know. I think that's where people go wrong. Exactly what you're saying is, oh, don't tell anyone about this. It's like, well, just tell them about it, because what you need to do as an adventurer is find something else. You can't just bank onto these secrets forever. I think that's the same with cooking. There's no point being protective over what you're doing right now, because really you're not doing your job properly if you haven't discovered something totally new within a couple of years. And then you're not going to be interested in what you're doing anyway, so you might as well share it.
Yeah, share it and move on. And I guess you're sort of backing yourself then, aren't you? To say, yeah, I'll give it away. I can still keep ahead with things. I'm interested in how you balance sort of having months of planning, like, right, we're going to plant a load of onions and they'll be ready in 6 months, or however long an onion takes to grow. Plant a load of onions versus the spontaneity and imagination of, oh, we've gone foraging and we found a load of sorrel today. So how do you, this is something that I struggle a bit with, what's the difference between planning versus just action in your life?
Yeah, it is a difficult balance. I think going back a few years, it was all action, no planning. And it made for very interesting, exciting food and quite sort of, stressful. But then as we've got busier and bigger, you've got to have more planning or it doesn't work. Or if you don't have planning, you can't actually put anything on the menu, because unless you grow a certain number of them, you haven't got enough. I can't serve a red pepper to 3 people and then the other person has a tomato, because I've only got 3 of them and 2 of them. I need to grow enough of the things to do enough of. So what we generally try and do is we'll have like a list of ingredients that we know we want to put on the menu. We don't necessarily have to come up with a dish 8 months in advance, but we kind of know roughly what we might do with them, and we make sure we grow a big volume of them so we're going to have enough to use on the menu. And then we'll grow some experimental crops as well. And then sometimes you end up doing things not as you planned, but unless you actually have the ingredients in the first place, you can't really do anything. So the key thing is to get the number. So I know I've got enough of these to serve every guest for a month. What we do with it nearer the time is a little bit more spontaneous. I think that's the sort of balance. Strike that balance, and it works quite well. If you just go, oh, we'll wing it in the city, and you're like, oh, I've come up with this amazing dish. Yeah, well, we've only grown 4 plants of that though, so you can't actually serve it to anybody. That's where we kind of went wrong in the first place.
So you need to have lay down the sort of sensible, slightly boring foundation, the safety net of, right, we need this, and this, and then
things that you know you want.
Yeah. And that's an important thing. That then on top of it, you can just throw on the sort of crazy, I found a whatever, go with it.
Exactly. It's like, well, we've got a polytunnel full of tomatoes, and until 3 days ago, we didn't know what we were going to do with them, but they're all getting ripe. And originally, we were going to go to actually the Cow Corner place I'm telling you about. We were going to make some fresh ricotta and serve that with the tomatoes, a really simple dish. And then suddenly at the last minute, the tomatoes ended up being semi-dried, So they're quite sort of sour and sweet and sour, and served with scallops. So like, how did that happen? That's the beauty of it. But we didn't have the tunnel full of tomatoes. We wouldn't be able to do any of it. So I think it's quite nice to, it's spontaneity, but with organisation in the background.
When I was cycling around the world, I had a phrase that I used a lot called pragmatic recklessness. Because what I wanted to do on that trip was be as reckless and crazy and spontaneous as I could, because I was a young guy having a big, wild adventure around the world. But equally, if you go full on reckless through Africa or Colombia, then you might well die, or at the very least fail. So I came up with this system of trying to be pragmatic. So lay down the basics of, I need visas for here, I need to work out where there's a war, blah, 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 sensible kind of thing. And then on top of that, just throw the recklessness of, to hell with it, let's turn down that road and accept this invitation for these dodgy looking people to their house and just see what happens.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, that was
That's
my
a nice
approach.
balance. I like
pragmatic
that.
recklessness.
Yeah.
You've started a new restaurant in York called Roots. How long's that been going?
It was last September that we opened.
Wow.
Yeah.
Has Joe Root been to Roots?
He hasn't. He should do, really. Yeah.
Is that on your
Maybe I should invite him.
to-do list?
Yeah.
You're doing so well with this place here. It's a fantastic success story. Why expand? Why are you getting busier doing that thing? Why are you risking failure to your reputation? Why don't you just stick with this place that's doing great?
It's a good question. I think it came from sort of two things. One, we're not fully booked all the time now. We're busy, but we're not fully booked. There was a time when we were totally fully booked, so you couldn't get in. So there would seem like there was a necessity to have more seats available for people to eat things.
Or put your price up.
Yeah, I don't think that's a long term. Like, it's all very well, but you're never going to be fully booked forever, are you? And then when you've put your prices up, I think you've got to think. You can't. There's no get rich quick in any form of life. I don't think so. I don't think that's a sustainable thing to do. But the other thing was more from the actual growing point of view, because we were expanding the growing. We're growing lots of different things. But actually, when you're just doing one menu in one place, it's very hard. You can't be self-sufficient. You have no use for a lot of the stuff, because you might use all the tomatoes one size but not the other size, or if you grow too much things, or you could use one part of the plant but not the other. So we need another outlet, really, and with Roots, it's allowed us to become much more self-sufficient, because it's a little bit more casual. It's kind of a sharing plate sort of thing, and it allows us to use all the produce. But the flip side is, we don't have to force it at the Black Swan. Whereas in the past, I'd have to force it, because I've grown all this, we'll have to use it. And I'll have to use them. Even though that's not quite what I wanted, I'm going to use it anyway, because I've got to. I can't waste things. Whereas now, we can cherry pick exactly what we want for the Black Swan, and then use, everything else still gets used. Not that there's anything wrong with the other things, but if you're trying to really get the exact specification of something that you want. So it enables us to be more self-sufficient and sort of close the circle a bit more.
Okay, you have a good answer to that. On the Roots, I was reading that the food comes in, there's 3 seasons essentially. You break down the year into 3 seasons, which I love these phrases. You have the preservation season, the hunger gap, and the time of abundance.
Yeah.
Which I love those. They could all be novels. They're great phrases. What are they, briefly?
Well, interesting novels. They actually came about from me writing a book. So I have a book called Roots, which came before the restaurant. And I suppose Roots also has sort of the concept of the book. And the idea is, I wanted to write a cookbook, and I was very nervous about writing a cookbook, because I think that it's there forever, and I didn't feel like it was I was far enough down my culinary journey. However, I also felt what we're doing needed to be recorded. And I started off on most cookbooks as spring, summer, autumn, winter. If you're farming up in North Yorkshire, there isn't really any produce in spring. In fact, most of our produce doesn't really come till the middle of June. But when I pick up chefs' books, so they're always peas and beans and things like this, all in sort of April and May in their books. And that's fine. They do grow in Europe, and then we ship them in and use them. So I kind of thought, well, I can't write truly a spring, summer, autumn, winter book and believe in it. Whereas I see it as January through to June, we call the hunger gap. for a reason, because we don't really have anything. There's a few seasonal gems. We get amazing Yorkshire rhubarb, some great root vegetables, and last year brassicas, but we use an awful lot of things that we've preserved. And then right now, it's July now, it's a time of abundance because I can literally do menus with just the produce that comes straight from the land, little amounts of effort into it, cook it, serve it, it's beautiful. But that's a very short window. And then the end of the year, we really spend frantically trying to preserve as much of the later the harvest. And the autumn's brilliant because you get so much stuff from the hedgerows. And that's just a free harvest if you know what to do with it. So we frantically try and make as much stuff between then and the end of the year to last us through. So I felt like we cooked with 3 seasons anyway. And from a growing and cooking point of view, there isn't 4 seasons. There's kind of like a time we got loads of stuff, a time we got nothing, and there's a time when there's a bit of autumnal stuff. So the 3 kind of came together.
Yeah, I really love it. And something, I haven't figured this out in my head yet, which isn't good because it's going to be too late. But somehow I feel this applies to life, like the phases of life, like the hunger gap, the time of abundance, the preservation season. I haven't worked it out yet, but I've got a month on the bike. I think that's about the different phases of your life. So I'm going to try and figure that out, and I'll get back to you when I do.
Yeah, I kind of get it. I mean, it's a very traditional way of looking. The hunger gap is not a phrase I made up. That's a traditional. It's a traditional thing. I think going back before we had refrigeration and air freight and sea freight and everything. When people were more self-sufficient, they would talk about the hunger gap when nothing grows. And the hunger gap actually doesn't really refer to January and February. It refers to the month of May, usually, because the month of May could be scorching hot, beautiful. Everyone thinks it's a lovely time, but that's actually the time when the plants grow. There's nothing to eat, to harvest. That's the time when we've got lovely weather, but we need all that energy to go into the plant to create something that we can then harvest in the time of abundance or the preserving season. So it's quite an old-fashioned term, I think, like going back a few hundred years.
Okay. The day has not been wasted. Thank you. So my last question to you is, I'm cycling around Yorkshire for a month. One of the great things about cycling is you're continually hungry and therefore very greedy. Where do you go as a chef? Where do you go when you've got an evening off and you want a nice meal in Yorkshire?
Okay. So, my favourite thing to do is actually Sunday lunch. Amazing. We used to cook Sunday lunches at the restaurant for years, and I thought I never wanted to touch one, eat one again, see another Yorkshire pudding. But since we stopped doing Sunday lunches, I now think they're the best thing. I can see why it's our tradition, like roast beef and Yorkshire puddings and meat and 2 veg and all that. It's delicious. I go to a place called the Dorney Arms at Newton-on-Ouse, which is a lovely little pub down on the River Ouse. And they just do the most brilliant Sunday lunch, and it's really good value and incredibly good quality. And it's always rammed for Sunday lunch because people know it's good. But that's like my go-to, and that's my sort of happy place. No matter what time of year it is, like a little glass of red wine, Sunday lunch, it's pretty relaxing.
Oh, it sounds very good. Tommy, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for showing me around. You've been very gracious and generous, and I've really enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Cool. Cheers, Tommy.
Thank you very much.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Living Adventurously. There's show notes from every episode on my website, alastairhumphreys.com/podcast. If you have enjoyed it, please take a screenshot of your phone and pop it up on social media or leave a review with your podcast provider. It makes a massive difference. Thank you very much. To make this podcast happen, I teamed up with Komoot, the outdoor planning and navigation app that helps you explore more of the great outdoors. One of the many ways Komoot helps you have better adventures is through their highlights feature. Komoot highlights are recommendations from local adventurers in the area you want to explore. They could be a great cafe, a particularly beautiful stretch of trail, a lookout point, or a well-stocked shop. These recommendations appear on the map as highlights, large red dots for popular highlights, those with lots of additional information and images, or small red dots for highlights that have fewer comments and images. Inside a hint, the size of the dot doesn't necessarily correspond to the quality of the highlight in real life. It only indicates how many people have visited the highlight before you, Perhaps it's a little less visited and therefore all the more special. Your very own outdoor experiences and some inspiring highlights are waiting for you. Go explore more with Komoot. Head to komoot.com/G and use the voucher code ADVENTUROUS to claim your free region bundle.